Everybody, strategy is quite an interesting word. We use it quite often, whether in the workplace or even the home place. What's your strategy to buy that car? What's your strategy to buy that business? What's your strategy to get that job? What's your strategy to keep at that job? It's a word we use a lot. We use it a lot, but do we really know what it means? I talked in another presentation about what strategy is, but I didn't spend time on the type of tools that we use to determine the strategies that we should follow. That is what this presentation is about. So let's talk first about what strategy is, just to give a brief background. There's really three components to a strategy or strategic plan, whatever word we want to use. In general, a strategy is, where are you, where do you want to go, and how are you going to get there? The how you're going to get there is what the strategic plan is. The plan to get to where you want to go. Of course, you have to know where you are. Then you have to determine where you want to be. The first part deals with a lot of tools and guides that you can complete to find out really where you are. The last part, which is the vision, is some type of analysis, contemplation, even a dream about what could be, what should be, what can be. So those two bookends on a shelf, so to speak, sit until someone comes along and says, I see where you are and I see where you want to go. I can help you get there. It's usually the manager that determines how to get there. Where to go is determined by the leader. So, more formally defined, a strategy is a set of processes, procedures, and actions that are intended to meet a goal or an objective. Strategic tools, which is the focus of this presentation, is a various array of instruments or guidelines that a person utilizes to determine the strengths, health, and position of an organization. What's a good example of a strategic tool? I'll give you an example from a medical office. When you go in to see a doctor, they usually do your blood pressure, your temperature, even your heart rate. They're trying to get a sense of how healthy you are just by taking a very few tests. Those tests have been around for over 100 years. Just by those very few tests that you take when you first walk into a doctor's office, they're able to determine at least the overall health of an individual. Of course, they're going to do many more tests, but it gives them a guideline, a baseline, a benchmark upon which to build from there. If any of those basic tests are off or wrong, then they know that there's an issue that they need to spend more time to authorize more tests to determine what the true cause of the problem is. It's the same in an organization. We have a number of tests that we're going to run, that we can run to determine the health of an organization, to determine not only whether the organization is healthy or not healthy, but also what can be done about it. These tools are really important to set the baseline or the foundation. What is to be done follows another video, and that's based on the information that we obtained, what should we do? That often takes a bit of the dream itself. Not as difficult or any more difficult than finding out what the root cause is, but they do have different ambitions. When you try to find out what the health of an organization is, it's really investigatory. It's really research-based. When you try to figure out where the organization should go, it's often more of what we call a gut instinct. This vision, this dream. It takes courage and guts to stake a claim as to where you think you should go. But you certainly have to have a good understanding of the organization as it stands that day. So what are some of the strategic tools? You're going to be surprised. There's going to be 12 tools that we're going to be talking about today. There's many more than 12. I tried to pick some of these tools that are most popular. Of course, the SWOT tool is one that we hear quite a bit about. There's the PEST and PESTLE. There's the SLOT, the SOAR. There's Porter's BCG, 4 corners, STEEP, and on the next page, there is the environmental scan, benchmarking, and critical thinking analysis. We're going to go over each one of these in our presentation. We're not going to spend too much time on each one, but there are some aspects within each of these tools that we're going to highlight. Our hope is to give you enough information about each of these tools So then you can understand if you're in a specific situation within a specific organization, I think I'm going to use benchmarking. I'm going to use the SOAR. The SWOT is the one that's best suited for this one. Most likely, though, you're probably going to use a combination of tools and techniques and guidelines. That's really what we should be doing. We shouldn't rely on just one tool and then make a decision that can be quite consequential for the organization's future. As we start, I always like to have some quotes. It sets the stage of what we're going to be talking about. First one, as I've said before, is what got you here will not get you there. What got you here may not or will not get you there. That means that you have to change your philosophies so that you can determine the proper course of action given often a different set of circumstances. So for those reasons, we want to take a look at what not necessarily has got you here as opposed to what is going to get you there, but both. To take a look at your history, but then also try to see if we can better predict future. So let's get started. We'll start with the SWOT. The SWOT technique is one of the most basic types of analysis that you would be doing in a strategic plan or the strategic planning process. Most people know of a SWOT analysis. It has 4 basic components to it. Each one is a letter on the acronym, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You'll see that when we have other tools throughout our presentation, they often use a variation of SWOT. What's interesting about education is we learn some of the components about education, and then we modify, as I often used to say, assess and adapt. We assess and adapt what we've learned and create something new and innovative, something that is more attuned to what we're seeing today. The SWOT analysis may be somewhat, as I say, passé. It may be last year's tool. It's still quite popular, and it really does allow you to make an investigatory review of an organization. It's really what a strategic analysis and these tools are intended to do. They're intended to guide you to make sure that you look at every aspect of the organization. So by following the SWOT or the PEST, which is the next one, it's guiding your efforts to make sure that you look at this aspect and that aspect. And then, once you've completed that investigation, then you can make a summary statement based on what you've seen. SWOT analysis. The strengths is what your company's good at. The opposite, of course, is what your company isn't good at. That's your weaknesses. Notice I use the word company. This is the part of the internal analysis. So the SWOT is really broken up into 2 halves, 1 and 2, and 3 and 4. 3 and 4 look at the external industries that you're in, not the internal aspects, the external. And it starts looking at these words like market and industry potential. Are there a few competitors, many competitors? What's the technology like? The last part is we focus on the challenges. So it's very similar to 1 and 2, 3 and 4. It's just a different focus. 3 and 4 is on the industry, whereas 1 and 2 is on the organization itself. And they all look at strengths and weaknesses. By laying out these strengths and weaknesses, the hope is the organization can get a better sense of their health. And SWOT is quite similar to PEST. There's another one that's going to come after this called PESTEL. PEST stands for Political, Economic, Social, and Technological. Again, an acronym that forces us to go through certain aspects. PEST looks at the political atmosphere. Of course, if you were looking at the SWOT again, that could be part of your opportunities and threats because it would be part of the industry. But here we want to focus specifically on the political, economic, social, and technological. Notice how this tool is less focused on the organization itself and more focused on the overall environment. This is one reason, which I'll state here, that some organizations and some strategic planners do more than one test. They may do a SWOT test and a PEST test, which is in some ways how PESTEL came up. So they do many different tests with the hope of doing a broad review of the organization. Rarely is one test indicative of the health of an organization. PEST looks at political, which is it reviews the government's political stabilities, tax and spending. We'll see that quite a bit. Economic is a theme, a focus of so many of these tools, and that looks at things like the GDP, which is a gross domestic product, which is the sum of all the goods and services produced by a specific country. We look at income, a person's income, tariffs, incomes and exports, interest rates, the debt of the nation and debts of individuals. So those are some aspects that we look at. Then we look at social, which is your population growth, your cultural shifts, immigration, things that affect the social fabric of the organization and their environment. That leads us to technological, which is one that is assuming even a more outsized role in our organizations. That's where we have the use of technology, machines, robots, artificial intelligence, even the remote workplace. We look at those factors as we look at how technology is impacting our world. Both those lead us to the PESTEL. PESTEL is very similar to PEST, as you can see, but they've added two things, two more aspects, two more letters. They've added the environment and legal. I think these are good additions. Environment looks at things like weather, climate, air quality, pollution. That's the physical environment that it looks at, which is a huge issue in at least some parts of the world. L looks at legal. Again, a huge issue. I come from the human resource profession, and our profession is dominated by the legal aspects of working in and working outside of an organization. PEST and PESTEL, again, are looking at less about the competition and the product and the service, but more about the environment. It's very similar to environmental scanning, which we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation. 3 down. SWOT. SWOT is similar to SWOT, except they've changed one of the letters. Instead of SWOT, it's SLOT. Somebody created a new theory. You all can create your own theory too. Look at so many of these tools that we're going to be presenting in this presentation. Create your own. You do not have to follow one that somebody else has created. But when you create your own theory, then write something up and it could get published and talked about at a next presentation, similar to what I'm doing today. SWOT changes, again, weaknesses and calls them liabilities. And what they're looking at is what factor is going to hinder our success the most. I think it's a good change, actually. What they're really saying is, in the future, what is our Achilles heel? In other words, what can arise that can put so much of our success in doubt or in danger? It focuses on the liability that an organization may have. Maybe you don't have enough money to last more than a year. Maybe some of your key employees are going to retire in the next year or two. Maybe a new competitor has moved in or will move in, and it's going to challenge your ability to be successful. So that's what the SWOT looks like. Again, strengths, liabilities, opportunities, and threats. Takes us to SOAR. Whether it's a tool that you're going to use, you've got to like the acronym. Can you imagine, yes, I'm going to do a study on your organization, and I'm going to use the SOAR technique. Most people think, wow, that'd be great. I want to soar against the competition. I want to ensure that our organization soars amongst anyone else. It sounds good, at least. And that's something to consider when you create a theory. Make sure that it has some recognition appeal to the organization and its stakeholders. Again, an acronym, and it stands for Strengths, Opportunities, Aspirations, and Results. The one thing that this tool is different than the others is it's very much future-oriented. So it looks at the core competencies. Core competencies are those advantages an organization has. Maybe they have some key talent within their firm. Maybe they have a tremendous amount of financial resources or backing. Maybe they have a customer base that's been developed over 30 or 40 years. It's very difficult to get anybody else to buy from other than the person who has developed this core competency. And then they focus on the future. The vision. Vision is a great word. I use the word dream. They want to look at where are we going to go. That's the whole focus, is where are we going to go? And then from there, we look at organizationally to position the organization on a track that's going to be one that they're going to follow for the near future. It's not really good for businesses that are not doing well, because if you're not doing well, is the future as important as trying to survive right now? But it really does talk about an organization that really wants to be different in their near future and figuring out what they can do. In particular, SOAR stands for Strengths, Opportunities, Aspirations, and Results. Strengths are what can we build on. So you look at your core competencies, and then you say, great, now what kind of core competencies can we develop out of what we have? It looks at the opportunities, a focus of so many of these. But here, again, since it's focus-based, the focus is, where can we go? You can see right at the very beginning of this acronym, they're already talking about, where can we go? Then it talks about your aspirations. What do we want to be? Not only where do we want to go, but what kind of organization do we want to represent? What kind of employees do we want to have when we are the organization of the future? And then last part is the R in SOAR, which is how do we know when we get there? How do we know when we've achieved our objective? And of course, once you achieve your objective, we have to create new objectives. So we always have to be figuring out where our organization should go, and then also positioning it to take advantage of its future. Leads us to Porter's 5 Forces. Porter's 5 Forces is quite famous. It's been around for decades. Michael Porter was a teacher at Harvard, and he developed this strategic plan to really look at the organization in relation to competition. It focuses almost solely on competition. And in general, what it's really looking for is if you want to join an industry, how easy is it to join? They want to look at the resistance that may occur as a result of you entering that business. So if you want to start selling hamburgers, then Porter's 5 Forces would look at, well, here's your competition, here's what they're good at, here's their competitive advantages, here's their core competencies. So then by highlighting all of those aspects, you can make a more concerted decision on whether that is the organization and the industry that you want to join. You may say, based on what I'm looking at using Porter's 5 Forces, this is not an industry that is hospitable to new entrants. So in particular, they look at 4 areas, and the results of those 4 areas, they result in a competitive assessment of the industry. They look at the threat of new industry first, through new entry. And what that means is, how easy is it for you to enter the market? If you wanted to start building a car, it's extremely labor-intensive, extremely fiscally competitive. You need a tremendous amount of money to start a car, because from the time the concept of the car is determined till the car is actually built and readied for sale, it could be 5 years. New models don't come out until every 3 to 5 years, depending on how quickly they can get a new model out. And it costs a significant amount of money. As a result of that, the threat of new entrants is fairly high. So if you're in a business that's automobile in nature, you're not necessarily going to have new competitors that arise frequently. It's good business to be in if you're established. And we'll talk about that in the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, which we'll talk about next. Supplier and buyer power, those are 2 sides of a coin. Supplier power is, how beholden to a supplier am I going to be? So if I go into an industry and there's only one place for me to buy my raw materials, that supplier can have considerable power over me. And same with buyers. If I get into a product and that product is only bought by 1 or 2 people, or my largest customers is this business or the other, then you are at the mercy of that person. If you sell your soul to get their business, and you're the only person that, or maybe they're the largest organization that you do business with, to lose that contract can be devastating to your organization. So supplier power and buyer power are very important when you're trying to figure out Porter's 5 Forces. And the last is threat of substitution. So if you have a product in the marketplace, how easy is it for somebody to get a substitute? For instance, Diet Pepsi and Diet Coke and Coke dominate the market. There's very few other beverages that dominate in the way that they do. Is there a threat of substitution there? Probably not. It hasn't happened. There's been some along the way. Diet Right was one. RC Cola is another one. So there's some out there. But as far as the percentage of domination in relation to sodas, it's really Coke and Pepsi. So that, of those four aspects, threat of new entry, supplier power, buyer power, and threat of substitution, when you make an assessment of all four of those, then you can start saying, well, here is my overall review of the five forces. Hopefully, that's somewhat interesting. It's one I use, and again, it's more focused on the development of a new product. But then also you want to look at how stable is my market. That leads us to the BCG. Most people have seen the BCG, but really don't recognize the title, which is the Boston Consulting Group. I obtained this slide from the internet. It's a pretty good slide. And what we look at with the arrows is, of course, as you go up and to the side, then that's good. So we'll start with the question mark. The question mark says it's a high growth rate and a fairly low market share. So high growth, low share. That's more what we call a question mark. And it's a question mark because although we have it's high growth, we're not doing very well in the industry. So we want to invest in those areas, but what's our chance of success? We don't know yet. But still, we don't want to let the high growth go away. And that's opposed to the stars. Stars have high growth, high share. We have a high share of the market. We do well in the market. And the market is continuing to grow. Of course, all of us want to be in stars. We want to work for an organization that has stars. We want to invest our money in stars. But when we look at the life cycle of an organization, the life cycle of a product, we soon realize that nothing really lasts. Nothing lasts. But a star shows the future of the organization, shows the future of the industry. That brings us to what we know as cash cows. Cash cows are the opposite in some ways of question marks. This is where we have a high share of the market, but it's low growth. It doesn't make a lot of money, but it's easy money. That's where you get from milking the cow. We want to take as much money out of there as possible. The industry is not going to grow very much, but we make quite a bit of money from that industry. We don't know how long it's going to last, but at the present, we're making a considerable amount of money with not much effort. And the last is the dog. And the dog is a low growth log, a low share. If you've ever heard somebody say, well, that's a dog stock, what they mean is that it's not doing well. Here, we'd want to liquidate and reinvest in other areas. Stockbrokers use this. Financial analysis firms use this. It is pretty good, and it's been around a long time, but it's pretty good. It's one that I would recommend. All of these tools, and we have only got through about half of them, what they have as their basis is to take a look at the organization and find out what's working and what's not working. It's a good thing. These things are good. It allows you, it forces you to look at certain aspects of the organization to make a critical assessment how they're doing. That's what we want to do. Four corners, this is used to predict behavior. It's focused on competitors, but we're looking at behavior. We're looking at things like motivation, current strategy, capabilities, and management assumptions. So here, one of the corners is motivation. What makes the competitors tick? What are they good at? Why are they doing better than us? Why are they doing less worse than us? Then you look at the current strategy of your organization. What's your current strategy? What's their current strategy if you're looking at other organizations? This brings up our capabilities. This is the strengths and weaknesses that we have in relation to other competitors. Pretty good. And lastly, management assumptions. Then we look specifically at their management team. Are they good? Are they talented? Do they work hard? Are they well respected within the industry? Those are areas that we want to look at to see, indeed, if they're pretty good. Four corners, it really focuses on the competition. It tries to determine what other competitors are doing. It focuses on what they're doing now and what they're capable. And it actually works best on direct competitors who can be identified and studied. And takes us to STEEP. Only a couple more. STEEP is sociocultural, technological, economic, environmental, and political legal. Each of these we've looked at in other tools. Social, cultural, look at demographic and lifestyle, as we've seen before. We've seen technology. Economic, we've seen before. Environment, this has become more of a concern with many of these strategic tools. We want to look at the impact of our organization on not only their industry, but the environment as well. And political legal is one that I think has much more relevance today than ever before. It's a very legally intensive industry that we're in. There is more lawsuits filed every year than the year before. And so we need to understand how best to manage this kind of legal framework. Political, again, goes back to government laws, regulations, policies. So we've talked about some of those. As we've again said, some of these are very similar. The acronym may spell out something differently, but at their core, they do have some basis. Environmental scan. Environmental scan and analysis looks at 6 areas. You'll see that it's quite similar. Economics, yes. Politicals, yes. Social trends, yes. Technology, yes. But here we bring in 2 more. Competition and geography. Competition looks at your market share, your competitors, consolidations, mergers. It wants to see how you do with your competition. Then it looks at geography, very similar to environment, right? The topography, climate, natural resources. The environmental scan and analysis tries to look at all of those aspects outside the organization. This is a very external type of analysis that you look at. There's others that look at internal, like SWOT and SWOT, but this one focuses more on the external environment. I hope this is an interesting discussion on environmental scans, especially as we go to benchmarking. I often like to say that when we look at these tools, that they give us one option to pursue, but that shouldn't be the only option. I have a quote here that says, "It's not whether we achieved our hopes or realized our dreams. What matters is that we tried to be good and tried to do good." These tools give us a basis to then make a decision that hopefully not only is it going to be productive and it's one that's going to lead the organization to success, but it's going to better our environment as well. Benchmark is something that we look at there. And again, there's only a couple more. Here we're looking at what others are doing in the organization. And how do we do that? We created a benchmarking team, usually people directly involved in the organization and in the competitive aspect, so marketing, advertising. And then we identify who we should benchmark against, what organizations are in our industry. From there, we collect and analyze the information, and then we take action. You're going to hear me talk more and more about taking action. But the benchmarking really is one of my favorite techniques because it grounds your decisions in the industry in which you operate. It forces you to look at the industry and see where you best fit in, where your product or service can have the best impact, and where to position that to obtain the greatest impact. That's benchmarking. And our last tool is critical thinking analysis. This is about a continuous review of the organization. Step 1 is talking about where you need to go. In other words, where's the organization going? And then it backs up and says, well, if this is where you're going, where are you now? And if you find out that you're going in this direction, but you don't have the ability to get there, it's quite illuminating, right? So then on the 3rd step, it says, what's the landscape look like? Here you do some kind of internal, external review. And then the last step is the most important, where you look at specific needs that need to be changed. So the focus of critical thinking analysis is, what aspect do I need to change to be successful? Key thoughts, hopefully, is we should use a variety of tools to assess the situations. We talked about that. We need to control our biases and emotions. All findings have to be based on facts and evidence, never ever on hopes and dreams. Again, fact-based. 3rd, ask others what you're missing in your findings. Probably the best question I ever ask whenever I do a strategy or strategic plan is, okay, what did I miss? Everybody, what did I miss? What didn't I think about? What didn't I consider? That is a key question, maybe the most important question. The key deliverable we want out of these processes is to find something that no one else has or that you can do better. After every tool, we've got to say, okay, where does this position our organization? And as I mentioned a couple slides ago, never forget to do something with what you found. Do something, do something. Two of my favorite words. Finally, we can't choose the cards we're dealt, but we can choose how to play them. Hopefully in this presentation, we've given you quite a few cards that you can use to then determine how best to play them in an organization. With that, everybody, enjoy the day.